All right. So, have you guys ever wondered why and how they pick default options for things, right? Whether it be some retirement program at your new job or whatever. When you get a new device, new phone, new computer, whatever, there's default options and you can change those, yes, but like there's always a default, right? So, this book that I found that I've been trying to get at for a while, to be honest, it's called Nudge, the Final Edition. At least this one is. It's not backwards for you guys. But they go into some of that and basically what's called choice architecture, right? And so to start off with, why should you even read the book, right? So, and what is choice architecture in a way? It's kind of self-explanatory in terms of how do people basically build whatever the situation is for which you to make choices, right? So, like, for example, walking into a cafeteria, right? I mean, someone had to decide where to put everything, right? Like, why don't the desserts come first? Or why would you put, why put the salad dressings at a salad bar, right? That seems self explanatory, but why not just put them elsewhere? Because you can use salad dressings for other things, right? And that's just some random thing that comes to mind. But that's kind of what we mean by choice architecture, right? And so understanding how choice architecture kind of influences the decisions that people make can kind of help you tailor your own messages to others if you're doing the same thing, whether it's some form of marketing or whatever, trying to convince someone of something or produce an argument, keeping that in mind. So it does go a little bit into psychology itself. But it also kind of helps you be aware, we'll say, of how those, we'll call them nudges, affect you, right? So like, how do you kind of nudge people kind of literally into making certain choices, right? And they have an interesting term in here called libertarian paternalism, and they talk about that explicitly, not only in just defining the term, but also talking about how it's kind of ironic and how it goes together. But I'll kind of leave that for them to decide, or not to explain, is what I mean, just because it's their term. And they'll do it much more justice than me, at least as of right now. But who wrote it, right? So Richard Thaler, he is a 2017 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences winner. And then you have Cass R. Sunstein, right? And so he won the Holberg Prize. Don't know exactly what that is, to be honest. But he was also in both the Obama and I guess currently Biden administrations. For the Obama administration, he was the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. He was in that. And then for the Biden administration, he is the Senior Counselor and Regulatory Policy Officer, as well as in the Department of Homeland Security, right? Sorry. Senior Counselor and, yeah, I'm just going to ignore that mess up. I need to figure out how to write notes better, apparently. But anyways, so this version was published a couple years ago in 2021. The original one was first published in 2009. So what can you expect to find in this book? It's pretty much into 5 different parts. Part 1 being humans and econs, which is kind of looking at, like how people are realistically versus how, I guess specifically like economic theory kind of describes them, right? The perfect person making, and there's certain assumptions for that for the econ, right? Basically the person you see in textbook examples is kind of where they're going with that. Meaning, they make the best decision for they're optimal in every decision and logical and rational and that sort of thing. And they don't make emotional decisions, really, that sort of thing. And so it really goes into that. And so it's kind of the perfect theoretical person, so to say, right? And that's what you see in economic models, right? Who they're kind of assuming. Other things they go into in that part are different biases and blunders, right, that people make that you can very accurately and consistently kind of guess. Also, how people can resist temptation, and then also kind of the whole following the herd mentality. That's something else they go into. Part 2 is the tools of the choice architect. So here they go into when and how to structure choices to influence decisions, and kind of like, when is that okay? How can you do that? They also go into something called smart disclosure, and what and how to reduce sludge, right? Which is another term they coined. Basically, like if you think about like government bureaucracies, right, and how it's kind of inherently slow, right, and there's sludge in the process, right? Basically, it's kind of, I guess it's like a nudge, but to slow things down, right? And so instead of kind of nudging someone to make a certain decision, they're kind of nudging them and kind of holding them back in a way. At least that's kind of how I think about it, right? And so part 3 is more about money. And so they go how, why, and where to influence people's financial decisions, right? Whether this is with like saving, investing for retirement, buying specific insurance plans, that sort of thing. This is kind of where they're going with that. In this section, they also talk about like how long do nudges last? Like if you nudge someone to make a certain decision, are they going to keep with that decision for the rest of their life? Is there a shelf life for that? That sort of thing. Part 4 is more about society. And so they go into kind of nudging for organ donations. Like how can you kind of set up that whole system to kind of incentivize people to donate organs if they can, right? And they go into, this is kind of where they go into the default solution illusion, as they say, right? And they also talk about nudging for climate change too, along kind of the same argument, I guess. But yeah, and they go into like different ways and like how to structure that system. Like, should you have to opt in for it, opt out? When should they ask? In terms of like when during your life. I think they also talked about like, an unexpected accident, if your family should have to make that decision. And if so, that's kind of, and there's a certain morals around that too, because when something like that happens, they kind of have to, if you're going to be able to donate organs, it has to be kind of immediate, right? You can't just be sitting there for a couple months and then they decide. But even then, even a couple months, depending on the situation and the family and so on, are they really going to make a optimal decision in that case? And that's kind of what we're talking about, is like there's so many different like cross currents that go into making these types of decisions, I guess. And when is it okay to nudge in certain directions, to kind of get what you want, right? And might not be the best way to say it, but that's kind of where it's going, right? And then the final part is they call the complaints department. Basically, it's them responding to critics. So with concepts like slippery slopes, is nudging sneaky? Are there certain moral lines that you shouldn't cross with nudging? And then should you nudge instead of mandating certain things? And like kind of going into the nuances of all that. And with everything that I just said, with all 5 of these different parts, right? I obviously just did a quick kind of outline of the general ideas that you can find in each section, and they do go into a significant degree of nuance. And I liked how they wrote the book in terms of explaining things. And they had very nuanced arguments, I'll say, in like how they described and explained their point of view, right? And what was the purpose of certain things, even just like describing certain parts of the books themselves, and explaining the purpose of only talking about this and not going further in depth, why or why not it was not necessary, and then just kind of leaving it be there, right? Because no purpose to just kind of add words and pages to a book. Overall, it's not too long. Just over 300 pages, about 340-ish. I guess. Maybe 339, so it's close, excluding the index and such. I also liked it because, especially with like the slippery slope argument, kind of called me out a little bit and made me think about it, because that's something, or with certain things, it makes sense for the slippery slope argument to kind of, let me rephrase that. Basically, it called out some of the criticisms and arguments that I would have against it, right? And explaining why it's not necessarily accurate to, or those criticisms don't have merit in certain degrees, right? In certain things, right? Now, there's other places to where it seems obvious, that's not applicable, right? In terms of I'm going to leave it as there's a significant degree of nuance in the specific applications for nudging, right? And the arguments against, right? And so one thing I liked about this book was that it called out certain views that I have, or certain criticisms that I have personally. And so it made me think more in depth on those. And I bring up the slippery slope argument specifically because that's one. Could also see the merit of nudging. And one thing I would like to note is, because I originally got this book because the way it was described to me was how this could be used for basically more or less forcing people to do certain things that may not otherwise be beneficial to them, right? Because you have to think about it, the big term that they use is libertarian paternalism, right? And so it's kind of like it's setting up the choice architecture for people to make specific choices and trying to literally nudge them in certain degree, in a certain direction, hence nudge, to make a specific decision and kind of make them believe that's the best decision for them, right? And so in that respect, it is paternalistic, right? Because you're kind of influencing the choices people make, but libertarian in the fact that, they still have the freedom to make that choice. They can still say no, right? And so, and the line of thinking behind the past couple minutes, whatever it's been me trying to describe this term, is really more described in part 5, like I was saying, the complaints department, and getting into the ideas or the questions like, is nudging sneaky, right? Are there moral lines you shouldn't cross? How hard can you nudge, and should you nudge in whether it be certain applications or certain topics like organ donation, that sort of thing. And that, if I remember correctly, that specifically is a rather lengthy chapter for organ donation, but they do go significantly in depth and that sort of thing, right? Because it's not a small decision. But anyways, I'm going to leave this one here. I highly recommend this book. I'm definitely going to be reading it again, and probably even listening to it a few times, get the audio book and that sort of thing, just because I drive a lot. But it's definitely something to think about. They do say specifically, nudge for good, right? And they do admit that, this stuff can and is used in malignant fashion, right? But it doesn't have to be, right? And that's kind of starts going into a few other questions that, could be posed. But with that being said, I'll leave you guys to ask and discuss those questions or whatever you come up with in the comment section below. And I'll put a card up in the corner for other book reviews that I've done, as well as a link to this book so you guys can easily find it yourself. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to leave this one here and hope to see you guys on the next one.